Hi, and welcome back to Buddy Chronicle. Today, a man loses his wife of 38 years. Then, while trying to hold what's left of his family together, he opens a door that should have been opened decades ago. This is that story. The smell hit me the moment I stepped onto the porch. Not rot, not mildew. Something older than that. Something sealed and forgotten, the way a house holds its breath when no one has lived in it for years. But people had lived here. My wife had grown up in this house. Her parents had built it in 1958 on 12 acres of farmland outside Millfield, Ohio. Her father Raymond had died in 1994. Her mother June had passed in 2009. And Helen, my wife of 38 years, had been buried on a Tuesday in March, 4 months ago. I was back at the farmhouse to do what I had been putting off since the funeral. Clear it out. Decide what to keep, what to donate, what to let go of. My daughter had offered to come, but I told her to bring my granddaughter and make a weekend of it. I thought the company would help. I thought having a 7-year-old running through the rooms would make the house feel less like a tomb. I was wrong about that. My granddaughter Lily had been inside for maybe 20 minutes when she found me in the kitchen going through the cabinets. She was holding her stuffed rabbit, the floppy-eared one she still carried everywhere, pressing it against her chest the way she did when something worried her. Grandpa. Her voice was careful in a way that 7-year-olds' voices usually aren't. Yeah. Bug? She pointed down the hallway. The door at the end. The one with the padlock. I tried to open it. I looked up. I hadn't noticed the padlock. I had been too focused on getting the utilities turned back on, checking the water heater, the basics. I'll check it out later. Where's your mom? She's on the phone outside. Grandpa. Her voice dropped lower. Grandma showed me that door once. When I was little, she said I should never try to open it. When you were little. She didn't smile back. She said some doors are better left closed, that what's behind it is sad. I looked at her for a moment. She was watching me with Helen's eyes. The same, dark brown, the same steadiness in them that had always made me feel like Helen was the most grounded person in any room she entered. Our granddaughter had that same quality. 7 years old and already more serious than most adults I knew. She said that. Those exact words. Lily nodded slowly. She made me promise. She said to tell you too if you ever came here without her. I set down the dish towel I'd been holding. Okay, I won't touch it today. But I was already thinking about it. My name is Frank Holloway. I am 63 years old, a retired electrician from Millfield, Ohio, and for 38 years I was married to the most decent person I have ever known, Helen Elizabeth Pryor, before she became Helen Holloway. I met her in 1984 at a hardware store where she was working the register on weekends to save money for nursing school. She was 22. I was 25. I knocked over a display of cabinet hinges reaching past her for a price tag, and she laughed at me for so long that I had to ask her name just to give myself something to do besides turn red. We were married in 1986. Our daughter Angela was born in 1989. We built a life that was not glamorous or dramatic or remarkable in any way that the world would notice. We fixed things when they broke. We showed up for each other. We argued about money sometimes, and were almost always wrong about what we argued about, meaning the money was never really the point. We grew old together the way people used to, side by side without a lot of ceremony. Helen was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in October of the year before last. She was gone by March. She never told me about the door. I want you to understand that part clearly, because it matters. In 38 years of marriage, Helen did not keep things from me. I knew her childhood. I knew that her father Raymond had been a cold man, not cruel exactly, but withholding in the way that some men of that generation understood as strength. I knew that her younger brother Daniel had run away from home when Helen was 8 years old and never come back. I knew that her mother June had spent the rest of her life waiting for a phone call that never came. I knew all of this because Helen had told me these things over the years, the way you share everything with someone you have chosen to spend your life with. What she had never told me was that she was not entirely sure Daniel had run away. I found the letter on a Saturday morning in July, 3 months after Lily's warning about the door. I had been working through the farmhouse slowly, a room at a time, and I had finally gotten to the master bedroom where her parents had slept and where Helen had stored boxes of old documents and photographs after her mother passed. Helen had always said she would go through them someday. Someday had not come. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the bed frame, sorting through a cardboard box of papers, when I found the envelope at the bottom. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in Helen's handwriting. Not to Frank or for Frank, just Frank in capital letters, the way she wrote when she was very certain about something. I sat there holding it for a long time before I opened it. Frank, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time to tell you what I should have told you years ago, maybe decades ago. I don't know where to begin except at the beginning, so here it is. The night Daniel disappeared, August 14th, 1979. I was 8 years old and Danny was 6. We had been playing in the barn that afternoon. Daddy got angry about something I never fully understood. He sent me to my room. I heard shouting from downstairs. Then I heard Danny crying. Then nothing. I fell asleep because I was a child, and children fall asleep even when things are wrong. In the morning, Daddy told me Danny had run away in the night, that he had packed a bag and gone because he was a bad boy who didn't appreciate what he had. I believed it because Daddy told me to believe it, and I didn't know yet that fathers could lie. But I never stopped seeing his face the way it looked when I left him at the top of the stairs. He was scared, not running away scared. Something is about to happen scared. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't look. I was afraid of what I'd find. The padlocked room at the farmhouse was Daddy's, and then it was mine to keep, and I kept it the way a coward keeps things. If you can, Frank, please look. I sat on that floor for 20 minutes, not moving. Then I got up and walked down the hall to the padlocked door. The padlock was a combination model, the kind with a 4-digit code. I tried Raymond's birthday. Nothing. June's birthday. Nothing. Then Daniel's birthday. June 3rd, 1000. 973. 0603. The lock opened. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12, lined with shelves Raymond had built himself. Old tools, mason jars, a box of papers from the farm's early years. And against the back wall, beneath a workbench that had not been touched in years, a large wooden chest, roughly 4 feet long, 2 feet wide. Sealed with another padlock, this one keyed. I could not break it. I went back to the truck for my bolt cutters. My hands were completely steady, which frightened me more than if they had been shaking. I think some part of me had already decided what I was going to find. Some part of me had known from the moment I read Helen's letter. The second lock gave on the third cut. I stood there with my hand on the lid for a long time. Long enough that I heard a bird land somewhere in the elm tree outside the window and sing a few notes and fly away again. Then I opened the chest. The smell was not rot. That was the first thing I registered. Something preserved it. Some chemical that burned faintly in the back of my throat. Formaldehyde, I would learn later, mixed with a packing solution that Raymond, who had worked a summer at a mortuary in his 20s before switching to farming, would have known how to obtain. Inside the chest, wrapped in oilskin cloth, were the remains of a child. Small. The size of a 6-year-old boy. I closed the lid and sat down on the workbench floor and called 911. My voice was calm. I am still surprised by that when I think about it. I said I had found what appeared to be human remains in a locked chest at a farmhouse in Millfield, Ohio. I gave the address. I said I believed the remains might be those of a child named Daniel Raymond Pryor, who had been reported as a runaway in August of 1979. I said I needed police and, if possible, a detective. The dispatcher asked me to please not touch anything further and to wait outside. I waited in the kitchen. Through the window, I could see the elm tree in the yard and the afternoon light coming down through the leaves, and a crow sitting on the top fence post doing nothing at all. The ordinary world just sitting there being ordinary while something unimaginable lay in a room 30 feet from where I was standing. My daughter called while I was waiting. I told her something had come up at the farmhouse and that I needed her and Lily to stay in town tonight. She could hear something in my voice and asked what was wrong. I told her I would explain everything, but not yet, not on the phone. She asked 3 more times. I said I love you each time and that I would call soon. 2 cruisers arrived in 11 minutes. The detective came 20 minutes after that. His name was Detective Karl Ostrowski. Heavy-set, mid-50s, with the kind of permanent tiredness in his eyes that comes from 30 years of seeing things most people never see. He shook my hand, walked through the farmhouse without touching anything, stood in the doorway of the small room for a long time, and then came back and sat across from me at the kitchen table. Mr. Holloway. His voice was even, professional. The remains in there. Can you tell me why you believe they might be connected to a specific missing person case? I handed him Helen's letter. He read it twice. Set it down. Looked at me. Daniel Pryor. He was reported as a runaway in 1979. That's right. He was 6 years old, my wife's brother. Your wife, Helen Holloway. She passed in March. She left me that letter. I found it today. Ostrowski looked at the letter again. What brought you to the locked room specifically? I told him about Lily, about Helen showing her the door when she was small, about the warning my granddaughter had given me. He wrote something in his notebook. Mr. Holloway. A 6-year-old boy was reported missing in 1979. The family was interviewed at the time? I believe so. I don't know the details. He nodded. If we confirm these are the remains of Daniel Pryor, this becomes a homicide investigation. The primary suspect, your wife's father, is deceased? Raymond Pryor died in 1994. Ostrowski sat back. I understand this is an enormous amount to absorb right now. I want to ask you a few more questions. But first, is there anyone who was alive in 1979 who lived in this house and might have had knowledge of what happened? I thought about June, Helen's mother. She had been gone for 15 years. I shook my head. Then I stopped. There was someone. Raymond's younger sister, my wife's Aunt Vera. She was still alive, 81 years old, living in an assisted care facility in Athens, about 40 minutes east. She had been at every family gathering for the 38 years I was part of this family. She had always been the kind of person who went very still when Daniel's name came up in conversation. I had noticed it over the years and assumed it was grief. Assumed it was the sadness of an old woman thinking about a boy who had run away and never been found. I told Detective Ostrowski about Vera. He wrote down the name. Dental records confirmed the identity 4 days later. The remains in the wooden chest were those of Daniel Raymond Pryor, age 6, who had been reported as a runaway on August 14, 1979. Cause of death, according to the medical examiner, was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. The preservation had been extraordinary. The combination of the chemical packing, the sealed oilskin wrapping, and the dry conditions of the farmhouse room had kept the remains in a state that allowed for full identification after 45 years. 45 years. Raymond Pryor had reported his 6-year-old son missing, had accepted the sympathy of neighbors and relatives, had let his wife spend the rest of her life hoping for a phone call, had let his daughter grow up believing her brother had chosen to leave. And the entire time, the boy was 40 feet away. Vera confirmed nearly everything. She did not require much encouragement. I think she had been waiting for someone to ask for a very long time. She told Detective Ostrowski and a colleague that she had come to the farmhouse the day after Daniel disappeared and found Raymond in a state she described as flat. Not upset, not grieving. Flat. Like the situation had been resolved and he was ready to move forward. She said she had asked him directly what happened to the boy. He had told her Daniel had been punished and that the matter was finished. She said she had been too frightened to ask what that meant, and too frightened to go to the police, because Raymond was the kind of man who made people frightened in ways they could not fully explain, and because back then, she said, people handled family business inside the family. I understand why she didn't speak sooner. I do not entirely forgive it, but I understand it. The investigation that followed revealed what the farmhouse records and Raymond's own sparse journals made clear. He had been abusive for years, by the standards of his generation and his community, invisible and unremarkable. The ordinary violence of a man who believed that authority over his family was total and unquestionable. Daniel, according to Vera and to two neighbors who came forward when the story broke in the local paper, had been a spirited child. Difficult in Raymond's language. Always in trouble. Always being punished for things that were not offenses by any reasonable measure, being loud. Spilling things. Asking too many questions. One neighbor, a woman now in her 80s, told investigators she had heard screaming from the Pryor farmhouse on the afternoon of August 13th, 1979. She had thought about calling someone. She had not. She wept when she told investigators this. She had carried it for 45 years without knowing what it meant, only knowing that it sat in the back of her memory like a splinter that never fully worked its way out. There could be no criminal trial. Raymond had been dead for 30 years. June had been dead for 15. The law has no mechanism for prosecuting the dead, and so the formal justice that Daniel deserved was not available to him. What was available was the truth. The county coroner officially reclassified Daniel Pryor's case from runaway to homicide. His name was entered into the state's database of identified murder victims. The local paper ran a story. The National Wire picked it up for a day before the news cycle moved on. For one afternoon, a 6-year-old boy who had been missing since 1979 had his name in the world again. My daughter came to the farmhouse the evening after the identification was confirmed. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I had sat with Detective Ostrowski, and I read her Helen's letter. I watched her face while she read it. I had braced myself for her to be angry with her mother, for the usual complicated grief of learning that someone you trusted had kept something from you. But my daughter is more like Helen than like me, and when she set the letter down, her expression was not anger. She was crying. Mom knew something was wrong all those years, and she carried that by herself. She tried to protect everyone, I said. That was who she was. She should have told you. Yes, but she was afraid. Yes. My daughter reached across the table and took my hand. She held it for a long time without either of us speaking. That is how grief works sometimes. It doesn't need words. It just needs someone to hold on. Lily knew something had happened without anyone telling her directly. Children always do. She was quieter than usual for several weeks afterward. She stopped asking about the farmhouse. One evening, she crawled up onto the couch next to me while I was reading and leaned against my arm. "Grandpa, did you find what was in the room?" "I did." "Was it sad?" "It was very sad." She was quiet for a moment. "Was it someone who needed to be found?" I thought about Daniel Pryor, 6 years old in the summer of 1979. Dead in his father's farmhouse while his mother set a place for him at breakfast and his sister learned to stop asking questions and the world outside went about its business. "Yes," I said. "He needed to be found for a very long time." She nodded as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. "I'm glad you opened the door, Grandpa." "I am too, Bug." We held a small burial service for Daniel in September. The county released his remains after the investigation closed, and after some discussion with the County Historical Society and the local veterans group who assists with unclaimed remains, we arranged for him to be buried in the same cemetery as Helen and her mother, June. It seemed right. He had been separated from his family long enough. There were perhaps 15 people at the graveside, a few neighbors with long memories. Detective Ostrowski, who had driven down on his day off. The old woman who had heard the screaming in 1979 and came now, I think, to say what she had not been able to say then. Lily stood next to me, holding my hand. The minister said a few words about rest and homecoming. When it was over, Lily stepped forward and placed a bundle of wildflowers she had picked from the field behind my house against the stone. She stood there for a moment with her hand resting on the granite edge. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I'm Lily. I'm your great niece. My grandma was your sister. She thought about you all her life, even when she didn't say so. She kept your door safe so nobody would mess with it before the right person came along. She was a good person. I miss her a lot." I stood there, not trusting myself to speak. Lily looked up at me. "You think he can hear?" "I think he can hear." She nodded and took my hand back, and we stood there for another few minutes in the September sunshine. "Can we get breakfast after this, Grandpa?" "Whatever you want, Bug." 4 months have passed since the burial. The farmhouse is mostly cleared out now. I kept Helen's rocking chair and her grandmother's quilt and a photograph of Helen and Daniel together taken in the summer of 1978, a year before he died. In it, they are standing in the yard with the elm tree behind them. Helen is 9, already serious in the way she always was. Daniel is 5, squinting into the sun, grinning with a gap where his front tooth had just fallen out. I have that photograph on the mantel now. I look at it every morning. I am 63 years old. I have had one great love in my life, and she is gone. And I am learning, slowly and without a lot of grace, what it means to still be here when the person you built everything around is not. Some days are harder than others. Most days I get up and do what needs doing and try to be present for my daughter and for Lily and for the ordinary things that make up a life. I think about Daniel often, about what it means to disappear inside your own home, in plain sight of everyone who should have seen you. About the neighbor who heard the screaming and did nothing. About Vera, who asked the question once and then spent 60 years sitting with the answer she had been given and the one she suspected. About Helen, who carried a half-known truth through 38 years of marriage and left it for me to find. I am not angry with Helen. I want to say that clearly. She was 8 years old when her brother died, and she was told he had run away, and she grew up in a house where the man who killed him was also the man who fed her and set the rules and defined what was real. Children believe what they are told because they have to. The alternative is too frightening to survive. She grew into a woman who had buried the fear so deep that questioning it felt like dismantling the ground she stood on. I understand that. I forgive it completely. What I cannot forgive, and what I will not soften, is Raymond, a man who struck his 6-year-old son, who put him in a chest and locked the lid and walked back into his life, and let everyone around him grieve a child he had killed, who looked at his wife every morning across a breakfast table and said nothing, who raised his surviving daughter in the same house as her brother's remains and called that raising a family. I have no language adequate to what he was. I don't think such language exists. But here is what I have learned, and what I want to leave you with if you are watching this. The things we don't look at don't go away. They wait. They sit in locked rooms for 45 years if they have to, patient as stone, and they wait for someone to open the door. Helen knew, in the part of herself she had sealed off and walled over, that something was wrong. She knew it in the way that children know the things adults tell them not to know. She spent her whole life keeping the door closed because she was afraid of what was behind it, and I think that fear cost her something. Not her goodness. She was the most genuinely good person I have ever known, but some piece of her own story that she should have been able to carry in the light instead of in the dark. Pay attention to the doors in your life. Pay attention when a child says something is wrong. Pay attention when the people you love go quiet at certain names, certain subjects, certain rooms. I know it is frightening. I know that opening a door can change everything you thought you knew. I opened that door and I found something I cannot unfind, and my family's history is now permanently different from the story we thought we were living. But Daniel Pryor has a stone with his name on it now. He has wildflowers from his great niece and a photograph on a mantel and a place in the cemetery next to his sister. He has been found. After 45 years of being nowhere, he is somewhere. That matters. That is worth the fear. I can see Lily through the window right now. She is in the backyard with the dog, trying to teach him to sit for the 400th time this month. He is not learning, but she is patient with him in the way that she is patient with everything, with a kind of steady confidence that the world will eventually cooperate if you stay consistent with it. She has Helen's eyes. She has Helen's steadiness. I think about how close I came to not opening that door. How easy it would have been to leave the farmhouse to an estate sale company and let someone else sort through Raymond's shelves. How easy it would have been to decide that what Helen asked of me was too hard, too old, too far in the past to matter. She trusted me with it. At the very end, when she had run out of time to do it herself, she trusted me. I would open that door again every single time. Thanks for being here with me today. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for each other is refuse to let the lost stay lost.